I did want to tell you, I do want to add a couple other things here. I want to tell you what happens when a bank collapses. Okay, when a bank collapses, what happens to the money supply? It shrinks, right? You saw the multiplier effect when we were talking about we loan, we loan, we loan, we loan. Okay, well, when a bank collapses, that all goes in reverse at the same speed. All right? Now, what happened with all the subprime mortgage stuff? Well, we have all of these assets. They're mortgages. They're worth something. Nobody knows what they're worth. Everybody knows they're not worth the face value because they were valued at very bubble-inflated prices of several years ago, which is what this thing is all about. Okay, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, God, I can't believe we were a part of that just 3 years ago. It seems like it's 50 years ago by now. We've heard so much about this. Okay, all of this stuff was bubble inflated way beyond any rational value. All right, so now the mortgages are set at those ridiculous values, and everybody knows this real estate is not worth that much. The prices have all deflated. These banks are loaded to the gills with these inflated mortgages that do not reflect real value. What don't they want to do? They do not want to write those mortgages down on their bank balance sheets. Why? Because in a fractional reserve system, they've got to have X amount of liquid reserves, right? And if they write off the inflated value of those assets, that's what they're calling toxic assets, if they write off the difference between what they're at on paper and what they're at market price, okay, if they collapse that down, which may be 30 or 40%, okay, that means they are totally destroying their reserve ratios.
And that's what this whole issue of the stress test is all about.
Stress test is what is the strength of your reserves. Those banks, if they write down the current market value of those mortgages, those banks are out of business. Now, what happens when a bank collapses? The economy implodes. That's why they're bailing out the banks. Because the biggest, most vulnerable ones out there are the biggest banks. Now, what happens when your top 15 banks in the nation go out of business? All right, now we're talking about everything just like sucking into a black hole here. All right, so now what we got is we got these toxic assets that nobody wants. We got to do something with them. Now, why aren't the banks lending? Well, the banks aren't lending because the land, they're using up their reserves, the fractional reserves they got in the back room here. So they're not letting anybody have anything. You know what they want? They want deposits. They want to build up their reserves. Because if they acknowledge those mortgages, their reserves are totally inadequate and they're out of business.